Because all the decorum was out the window, man.
Because of him or because of... I mean, the guy or... And are they prompted by him? No, they have to take it.
Good morning. We'll call the meeting back to order. Clerk has determined by a silent roll that we have a quorum present, so we will begin business. I believe we finished with the witnesses yesterday with regard to the reports of the Legislative Auditor's Office. Counsel, are you prepared to call your next witness?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The House Committee on the Judiciary calls Scott Harvey.
Mr. Harvey, please come forward. If you would, please take your place over there behind the microphone on that small table. And just remain standing till I administer the oath. If you would, please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give in the matter that's now before this committee will be the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Counsel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Harvey, thank you for being here this morning. Could you please state your full name so that the committee knows who you are?
Scott Elliott Harvey.
Could you move the microphone up just a little closer?
Scott Elliott Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Harvey. Mr. Harvey, were you previously employed by the Supreme Court of Appeals of West Virginia?
Yes, ma'am.
If you could, please just tell the committee the time period that you worked for the Supreme Court.
October 2005 through November of 2017.
When you first began working for the Supreme Court in 2005, what position did you hold?
It was database administrator.
Back at that time in 2005, what were your duties as the database administrator?
It was to oversee any databases that the court housed, keep them upgraded, manage those databases.
Could you adjust the volume as well from where you are? Thank you.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Thank you. How long did you hold that position?
You have him repeat the answer to the last question. Yeah.
Yes. I think the last question we were on was your position that you held at the Supreme Court. Could you please tell the committee the position that you held when you first began work in 2005?
The position was database administrator.
And as database administrator, what were your duties?
Responsible for all of the databases that the court housed.
How many databases were there at that time, if you recall?
I do not recall.
Okay. How long did you hold that position as a database administrator?
Until 2011.
2011. And in 2011, what position or what happened to your position?
I was transitioned to the Director of Technology.
And did you hold that position from 2011 until the time that you left in 2017?
Yes, ma'am.
As Director of Technology, could you please tell the committee what your duties were in that regard?
The broad scope is overseeing all technology aspects of the Supreme Court.
As the Director of Technology, how many employees did you supervise or did you have in that department?
It varied from time to time.
Could you
If
just
I
give
can
us a
remember,
range?
A range from 17 to 25.
As part of your duties, and I'm going to ask with respect to both of your jobs, either as the database administrator or the Director of Technology, did you personally ever have to go to any of the justices' homes for any reason?
Yes, ma'am.
And let's try to, now I'm going to try to categorize that or get it out. As the database administrator, did you have to go, before you became the director, did you have to go to justices' homes for any reason?
Yes, we wore many hats in IT, and it was whoever was available.
For what reasons, if you can recall, would you have to go before you became a director, would you have to go to justices' homes?
They may have a computer issued on a state-owned computer, upgrade, install of software, anything that would affect that piece of equipment.
And did you also have to go, after you transitioned into the Director of Technology, did you have to go to any justices' homes for any reason?
Yes, ma'am.
Let's start there. And I understand you said you became the Director of Technology in 2011.
Yes.
From that time period until the time of your departure in 2017, do you recall which justices' homes you went to personally?
If I am remembering correctly, I think I have been to every justice except Justice Walker.
And if we can, let's begin then with that understanding. Let's begin with Justice Lawfrey. Have you, or did you, I understand you're no longer employed by the court, did you, while you were employed by the court, go to Justice Lawfrey's home?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recall how many times you personally went to Justice Lawfrey's home?
Approximately 4.
Okay. It is my recollection that Justice Lawfrey, I believe, was elected in 2012 and so started in 2013. So would it be correct that you would have been the Director of Technology at that time?
Yes, ma'am.
Let's begin, if you can recall, I know you indicated it was approximately 4 times. Let's begin with the first time you recall going to Justice Lawfrey's home. For what reason did you go to Justice Lawfrey's home the first time?
What I would call it is a site survey, and that is to look at the residence and see what kind of work needed to be done.
And how did it come about that you ended up at Justice Lawfrey's home? Was a request made of you?
It was requested.
Who requested it?
It was Justice Lawfrey.
And once you went to his home, do you recall, if you can, either the time period by year or by month that you made that first visit to Justice Lawfrey's home?
No, I do not. Do not recall.
If you know, just trying to narrow it down, would it have been certainly, oh well, not certainly, was it after he was elected as a justice?
Yes, it was.
Do you recall how soon, do you have any recollection as to whether or not it was within the first couple of months, first year?
I would say it was within the first 6 months.
Okay. when you went to his house to perform the site survey, do you recall if anyone else accompanied you that time?
Yes.
Who was that?
There were several technology employees. I know Scott Conrad went because he was the network administrator. And I would say Anthony Hatfield and maybe Ryan Arthur.
How long, if you recall, were you at Justice Lawfrey's house on your first visit for the site survey?
It was several hours.
And if you recall, were the other gentlemen that you just mentioned, Mr. Conrad, Hatfield, and Arthur, were they there with you the entire time?
Yes, ma'am.
If you recall, was Justice Lawfrey present at home during that first visit?
Yes, ma'am.
I understand you've described that as a site survey. If you could please just try to further explain to the committee what you mean by a site survey, what you actually did that day.
When any work is to be performed, you want to see what you're dealing with. You know, is the house stone? Is it wood? Do we have to drill through the floors? A layout of the land, for a, lack of a better explanation.
And what type of work were you planning to do at Justice Lawfrey's home?
It was extending the internet access, network access, setting up cable connections, a wireless access point.
Do you recall any conversations that were had with Justice Lawfrey that day, on the first day you were there for the site survey? Any comments that he may have made, any discussions about the work that was going to be done?
Well, some of the questions I had for Justice Lawfrey were, do you mind if we drill through your floor? As far as any other questions or comments, no.
And in the end, I'm going to jump ahead and then I'll go back. In the end, did you end up having to drill through the floor?
I'm almost certain we did, because the wiring had to be ran from under the house up through into areas of the house.
While you were there for that site survey, I understand you said at least some of the work was to extend the internet connection and due to a couple of other things. Did you have an understanding as to where the work was going to be done and where the wires actually needed to be for computer access?
Yes.
And what was your understanding of where computers were going to be located?
One access point was it was like a kitchen family room, and one access point was in a small room that I believe he referred to as an office area. I can't be certain that that's exactly what it was called.
As you sit here today, I think you've just indicated that were two access points. Were those, if you recall, were those for laptop computers or desktop computers?
I'm almost certain there were desktop computers, but in my memory, I think there was a laptop involved, but I can't be certain. I don't have access to the court documentation.
Okay. And I'm sorry if you just said this, I missed it. Did Justice Lawfrey let you know where the computers were to be placed, or how was that decision made?
Yes, ma'am.
Justice Lawfrey?
Within a 4-foot area, it needs to be here.
Okay. At some point after that, I understand from your testimony that you made a second visit to Justice Lawfrey's house. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And for what reason was the second visit?
That was to perform the work, actually supervise the folks that were there.
Do you recall how much time passed between your first visit for what you termed the site survey and then the installation, the actual work?
No, ma'am. I would say it was within 2 weeks.
Okay.
But that's an estimate.
When returned for the actual work to be done, I think you indicated at that point was your role as a supervisor.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you, if you could please tell the committee if you recall the identities of any of the individuals that were actually there from the court performing the work?
Okay, just knowing the people that were under me and did that type of work, and I'm not completely certain, but I think it was Anthony Hatfield, Scott Conrad may have been there, and Mr. Ryan, Arthur.
Were there any other outside type technology people, consultants that had to come in and help, or was all of this work done by court personnel?
This was all performed by court personnel.
And on that second visit, when the work actually occurred, do you recall how long it took for that installation and the actual hands-on work to happen?
It would be no more than a day.
Please, if you can, describe to the committee the actual work that was done. I think you've already indicated that something had to be done with wiring underneath.
Yes.
If you could just walk the committee through what you recall of the work that actually had to be done.
An internet connection existed, so we had to tap into that internet connection with a hub/router wireless access point, and then from that device run network cabling to the location specified.
And the wiring that had to be run, did you indicate that it had to be done under the house?
From memory, I think there was 2 that had to be under the house.
I'm going to back up now for a second. I forgot to ask you a question, and I apologize. With respect to the first visit at Justice Lawfrey's home, you described that as a site survey, and I want to make sure I don't miss this. Had you personally ever performed a site survey at any other justices' homes during your time at the court?
Not to that extent.
Okay. Now, with respect to the second visit, I think you said that's when actual work was done and wires were installed. Had you ever been involved in that type of installation at any other justices' homes during your time working for the court?
No, ma'am.
If you recall, was Justice Lawfrey present during the second visit you had to his house when the work was actually being done?
From memory, he may have been there when we showed up because someone had to let us in, and I'm almost sure it was Justice Lawfrey. After that, he may have left. I cannot remember.
And that may have answered my next question. Do you recall any conversations that either you or any of the people you were supervising that day had with Justice Lawfrey during your second visit when the work was actually being done?
The only questions I do remember asking is the work sufficient? Is this where you want it?
And what was his response?
He agreed that it was.
After that second visit, I think you told me that you went back a third time. Could you please tell the committee the reason for the third visit?
The third visit was to make sure everything was working and to make sure the computers were connected to the internet and there was access from one computer to the court computer housed at the Capitol.
So of the 2 computers that were installed in Justice Lawfrey's home, one of them had access to the court's computer?
Yes, ma'am.
Did the other one, if you recall?
It did not.
Okay, so only one of those computers had access to the court's computer.
Yes, ma'am.
Was there ever any discussions during any of the times you were at Justice Lawfrey's home as to the reason for the need to have 2 computers installed?
I'm sure there were, but to say, 100% this is what was said, I can't say that. But to go out on a limb and kind of remember some of the conversation, it was just a shared computer.
Just a shared computer for the family, a shared computer?
If they wanted to get on it, they could.
Okay. And when we talk about that shared computer, what I'll refer to as a shared computer, where was that computer located?
That was in the kitchen/family area.
And the computer that was in, I think, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, I think you have indicated in an office area, the second computer, was that the computer that had access to the court's computer?
Yes, ma'am.
The third visit that you made to make sure that everything was working properly, do you recall if anyone accompanied you to that on that visit?
I think, this is just from memory, can't be 100% sure, but knowing the situation, I think Andrew Hint may have went with me or drove himself.
Was he a member of the technology department?
Yes, he is. At that time, he was a field tech.
Okay. Do you recall how long that you were at Justice Lawfrey's home on the third visit to make sure everything was working?
That was a quick visit. I would say at most 2 hours.
Were there any issues that you noted during that third visit with respect to the work that had been done?
Not the third visit.
I believe you indicated when you first began testifying that you might have gone to his house approximately 4 times. Do you recall any other visits to Justice Lawfrey's home?
Yes.
Okay. What was that visit for?
There was a computer issue, and it was on one of the desktops.
If you have any idea, could you tell the committee by year when that 4th visit might have occurred?
No. I can't say. I don't have access to my email.
Who went with you on the 4th visit, if anyone else?
I don't recall if he went with me or I dispatched him to come, but it was Mr. Hint.
What was the trouble that required that 4th visit? What issues were occurring?
It seemed to be malware or a virus, and at that point I wasn't sure if the computer needed to be replaced, rebuilt, or if it could be the virus taken off, malware.
And what did you determine once you got there on that 4th visit?
I can't remember. I want to say the hard drive was replaced, but that's a guess.
And with respect to the virus, do you believe, is it your recollection that was the issue, though, that there was a virus on the computer?
Yes, it was either a virus or malware.
Which computer was that?
That was the computer in the family room/kitchen area.
The one I've referred to earlier as the shared computer?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Were you or any of your employees ever able to determine the source of that virus or the malware?
It came to me through the IT chain, not directly from the person, that there were quite a few games installed.
What type, if you know, what type of games?
I do not know.
Okay. Do you recall any other visits that you personally made to Justice Lawfrey's home?
No, ma'am.
With respect to your employees, the people that you were supervising while you were the Director of Technology, do you recall any any visits that you might have dispatched or sent any of your employees to Justice Lawfrey's home in which you did not go with them? It would have just been one of your employees.
Yes, I know there were more times, but to put a number on it or a time frame, I can't.
Do you recall generally the reasons for any of those visits that your employees had to go to Justice Lawfrey's home?
It was a range. It could be printer issues, computer issues, maybe not being able to connect to the network issues, things like that.
Mr. Harvey, I now want to ask you the same questions with respect to the other justices, and I want to confirm before I start down this path, did you indicate that you don't believe you've personally ever been to Justice Walker's home?
Correct, I have not.
Okay, I will not follow up on that then. Let's begin with Justice Workman. Do you recall if you had personally ever been to Justice Workman's home?
I recall being there one time. It may have been more, but I do recall one.
Do you recall the reason for that visit?
I believe the computer could not connect to the office computer in the Capitol.
And if you have any recollection, and I know I'm testing your memory now, but if you have any recollection, do you recall how long that visit was to Justice Workman's home, that time you went to check the connection?
No more than 2 hours.
Okay.
Again, that's an estimate.
Now I'd like to ask you the same question with respect to Justice Davis. Do you recall if you personally have ever been to Justice Davis's home?
Yes, I have.
Do you have any recollection or idea as to the number of times you've been to her home?
Not the number of times, no.
Could you give us any type of range, if it would be less than or more than 5 or 10?
I would say less than 3, 4.
Okay.
Just guessing.
Understood. If you recall, do you remember the reasons for your visits to Justice Davis's home?
Yes, unable to connect back to the office.
And any idea as to how long your visits would have been at her home, just for those connectivity issues?
It would probably be the same as Justice Workman's.
At the most, probably 2 hours?
Correct.
I believe you indicated with respect to the visits that you made to Justice Lawfrey's home that you had really never done a site survey such as his with any other justice's home. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And I believe you also indicated with respect to the scope of work that was done at Justice Lawfrey's home with the installation that you had not been involved in anything to that degree, if I may say it that way. Would that be correct?
Yes, ma'am. That is correct.
Do you recall having any other conversations with Justice Lawfrey about the work that was done at his home, the IT work that was done at his home, other than what you've already testified to this morning?
No, ma'am, other than verifying that he was satisfied with the work.
Let me ask you now about the computers. I believe you indicated that the installation was for 2 desktop computers that you believe, and there might have been a laptop also. Is that correct?
Yes, that's just for memory, and I would have to look at documentation to verify that.
With respect to the other justices, and let me just ask you generally, the other current justices, so we're talking about Justice Walker, Workman, you can tell us if you know about Justice Ketchum, and then Justice Davis. How many computers, court-supplied computers, did the other justices have at their homes?
I believe it was 1.
What about printers? Did they all have printers?
can't completely say that they all had printers, but I do know Justice Lawfrey had a printer. I believe Justice Workman had a printer because we had to work on it.
Any other equipment that any of the justices had at their home for IT purposes that you recall?
No, I would have to look through the inventory to see.
With respect to Justice Lawfrey's, the installation and the work done at his home, if you could just try to describe to the committee the layout of Justice Lawfrey's home as you would go in, where those two computers were placed.
From memory, if you enter the front door of the house, the shared area was to the right, and the office area was to the left. But to say exactly the layout of the house, I can't do that.
But one was to the right and one was to the left of the, once you would enter the home?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Harvey, I want to now ask you a couple of general questions with respect to the time that you were in the home of Justice Lawfrey. There has been testimony and reports about a desk that might have been at Justice Lawfrey's home, a Cass Gilbert desk. Let me ask you first, do you have any knowledge about whether or not a Cass Gilbert desk was located inside Justice Lawfrey's home?
There was a desk, but to say it was a Cass Gilbert desk, I can't do that.
Okay. The same with respect to any other furniture, a couch or anything else. Are you aware of any other furniture that has been mentioned in any media reports that you noticed that you would have seen at Justice Lawfrey's home?
I know there was living room furniture, but to say what kind of couch or what kind of chair, I can't.
I want to ask you now just a few questions generally about the technology department and things associated with that. Let me ask you first, are you aware of work being done by a consulting company that involved a Mr. Pritt? I believe it was JRP Consulting.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recall what type of work that particular company provided to the court?
When JRP was first brought in, it was general technology consulting work, and I didn't have enough to really keep them busy. So this person was moved over to kind of be the eyes and ears of the court's transition to OASIS. At that time, Mr. Pritt worked with the financial director, and the financial director basically set it up so this Mr. Pritt could go to the OASIS meetings.
But Mr. Pritt started out as general consulting work for technology.
Correct.
And then was transitioned into another role because there wasn't enough. You couldn't keep Mr. Pritt busy, is that fair to say?
If I remember correctly, again, if I had access to my email and documentation, it would be easier. But he was put on a project to set up a scanning printer on one of the floors.
The two of us, we've been talking about Mr. Pritt. Were there any other employees associated with JRP Consulting, or was it just Mr. Pritt himself?
It was just Mr. Pritt.
Okay. Was Was your office, the technology office, involved in any renovations that were done in the justices' offices in the east wing of the Capitol?
We were, but only at the technology level, and that is providing the network wiring, whatever's needed to make technology work in those offices.
I think that answers my next question, but I'm going to ask it just to confirm. Do you have any knowledge about the furnishings, the cost of furnishings, or the remodel type work that was done in any of the justices' offices that did not have to do with data access ports and technology?
No, ma'am.
What type, just generally, this is a very general question, what type of work was your office involved in when the offices, and I understand they may have been renovated at different times, but when they were renovated, what type of work did your office perform during those renovations?
During the design phase, it was to determine where phone lines needed to be located and network cabling lines. And we would also determine if we needed power outlets in certain areas of the office. That was the extent of our work.
Mr. Harvey, I want to also ask you some questions. During some prior testimony, there has been mention made of space that the Supreme Court had at City Center East, I believe, is perhaps where it was located. If you could tell the committee, to the knowledge you have, of what, at least part of what is located there.
I can only testify to the IT section.
Okay.
And it is located on the 8th floor of City Center East. And offices are on the outside of the building surrounding a dedicated server room in the middle.
So the server room for the Supreme Court is located at City Center East?
Yes, ma'am.
Prior to that, if you could please just give a brief history of where the server room was located before that, and any issues that might have been associated with that.
Prior to that, approximately 2005, it was located on what we called the 5th floor of the Capitol, or the penthouse area. It's just a small room in the top of the Capitol. It was housed maybe 2 racks, 3 racks of servers. It did not have dedicated power. It really didn't have dedicated cooling. And sometimes the room would get so hot we would have to open the windows to cool the servers down, because if they shut down, the entire judiciary shuts down. So it was determined that that is not a way to run a branch of government. And we went on the venture of securing an area. I believe there was a server room secured prior to that, external of the Capitol. It didn't work out, and the City Center East location was secured.
And what type of work, again, very general question, what type of work had to be done at City Center East for that server room?
The server room had to be a secure area because the court not only connects to the state police, but we share information with some federal agencies, and you need to have controlled access to that area.
Mr. Harvey, thank you very much. I don't think I have any further questions at this time.
Thank you.
Mr. Harvey, we allow our members an opportunity to ask questions. So if you would be patient with us, we're going to go around the room and allow that to happen.
Yes,
I'm going to start on the other side today, first row. Delegate Lane, you have any questions?
Yes, I do. First of all, could you introduce the person sitting beside you?
Yes, ma'am. This is Lonnie Simmons, my counsel.
Okay, thank you. You're going to have to go to real basics for me because if a person already has internet, why does there have to be a whole lot of other work to just set up a computer?
Generally speaking, and I will use Suddenlink as an example, a Suddenlink employee comes to your house and they install internet from Suddenlink. So they will install your router and connect it to one computer. That one computer may only be cabled within 4 to 5 feet of that point. To connect other computers throughout the house, you would have to set up more wires or access points.
So if Justice Lawfrey had only had one computer in the house, he probably could have done all of this himself?
Just from memory, there was one computer connected, just from memory, to the internet that was already at the house.
Okay, and so then to add another computer, you have to do something else?
Yes, ma'am.
And if you want to add 2 more, you have to do a whole lot more.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I guess part of the issue is that he wanted to work from home and he wanted to have access to the court network. And so is that what took the bulk of your work, was setting it up to the court network?
Right. I can't testify that he wanted to work from home, but we provided a computer that allowed him to have access to the court network.
And he wouldn't have been able to do that on his own?
No.
And do you know the computer working from his home on the internet, did the state incur any extra internet charges because of that?
Not to my knowledge.
So whatever he was paying, and I assume it was probably Suddenlink, the state didn't pick up that tab?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Pushkin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here. Let's see. In your time working in both positions that you've had at the court, have all justices had home access to the court system?
To my knowledge, yes. I cannot testify to Justice Walker. My transition out of the court was close to her transition into the court.
Okay. In your time, have you or any employee of the court had to install, run cable lines, install computers for any other justices, or were they able, following up on the question from the gentlelady from the 35th, were they just able to hook up a computer because they were just using one computer?
We had never performed work to that extent.
To that standard. So you didn't have to go and do the installation for any other justice, to your knowledge, since you've been there?
We may have ran a cable from a computer to a plug-in, but I don't recall any work to that extent.
Okay. And like, as you stated before, that was simply because there were more than one computer. He requested more than one computer, he being Justice
And the
Lawfrey.
locations.
Yeah. Okay, as I guess that means that no other justice has requested more than one state-owned computer in their home?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Let's see. There, in the report, are you familiar at all with the report that came from the JIC, the Judicial Investigative Commission?
No, sir.
Okay. Well, in that report, I believe it states that internet technician from the court, imagine you or someone that works with you, set up accounts for Justice Lawfrey's wife and son.
I can't testify to that. If accounts were set up, it's just a logon username and password.
So what would that mean? What does setting up an account for somebody mean?
On a computer, you have a username and password to allow you to log into that computer. So those are accounts.
Okay. Just setting up their passwords so they can get into the computer that's owned by the state, correct?
Correct.
All right. Well, let's see. I know that that location is inside the city limits of Charleston. I believe it's in the Shadow Lawn neighborhood. Is there a reason why would they need a special higher speed type internet than anyone else in the city of Charleston? I mean, I know that we're fortunate here, as opposed to a lot of parts of the state where they don't have that kind of access. But do they have the same adequate access to? Or was there a need to speed up their access so they were able to do work from home from his house?
I can't testify to his access speed, but a normal connection from Suddenlink, probably their lowest speed, would suffice for remote access.
Okay. And was there like a matter of security? Did they have to have a secured network there? Was that?
It is a secure network.
It already is.
It has a firewall.
Okay. I know with our internet access, we also get television with that. Do you know if they were running their television cable from that access?
I can't testify to that.
Okay. Have you seen in our package we have a picture of the Cass Gilbert desk. Have you seen it? The picture?
No, sir.
Would you mind looking at it for a second?
No, I do not mind.
We'll have somebody deliver it to you. Just stay seated.
Yeah. Well, I just passed it to him. I gave him my copy.
And let's just let the record refer to the exhibit number that he's looking at, which is exhibit.
I don't have. He has my copy. It's not in front of me. Which exhibit number
Counsel,
is that?
which exhibit is that?
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe it's an exhibit. It is the part of the post-audit report number.
All right. At what page? At page 23. Very good.
Okay.
Go ahead with your questioning.
Okay. Thank you. Is that the desk that the desktop computer in what you described as the office area in Justice Lawfrey's home? Is that the desk that you recall seeing there?
Sir, I cannot testify to that. I just know there was a desk. I do not remember what it looked like.
Okay. When you installed the computer in the office area, do you recall if there were, because on that desk I can't see the back of it, and I know like at home I have a cheap desk and I put a hole in it to run wires through to get to the computer. Do you recall there being any holes in the back of the desk to run wires through?
I do not.
You do not? Okay, well thank you. That's all the questions that I have for now. Thank you very much.
Delegate Zatazalo.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here. My question is, are there any written policies for internet connections at home that the Supreme Court has in place?
Sir, if there are, I have never seen them.
Okay, very good. And the other question I have is, I want to understand this just to make sure I got it clear. You've never been to Judge Walker's home, but is that because she was elected after, when you didn't have any, you were no longer in the employ of the Supreme Court, or is it just that she never asked for help?
She never asked for any home help.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Delegate Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple follow-up questions. You had stated previously that you've never done a site survey on other justices' residence. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Would that be due to the fact that they've already been set up prior to your employment?
Yes, that could be a reason.
Okay. And the location that you had worked on at Judge Lawfrey's residence, and it says that I believe your testimony was you had to do some reconfiguring of the LAN cable or whatever that may be, but not at any other of the justices' residence. Is that correct?
Correct.
Would that be possible because maybe his wasn't set up in an ideal location initially, and theirs were, that you didn't, no one had to go reconfigure theirs?
It could be, but I can't testify that that's the reason.
Okay, because you didn't help set up the previous
That is correct.
setups, okay. And follow up to my colleague on the left here, there's no internal policy for installing personal items, i.e. games, personal emails, et cetera, on the computers?
Not that I have seen.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Byrd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. The first question I'd like to ask you, sir, is you mentioned something earlier I just want to clarify for the record, is a wireless router was installed? Is
Yes.
that correct? Was there a wireless router in the house previous to your site survey?
I do not recall one. It was a multi-function device. Not only is it wireless, but it has a hub router built into it.
Does that allow more than one instrument to tap into that wireless router?
It does,
Okay.
but they would have to have a security key to gain wireless access.
And is that security key given to Justice Lawfrey?
I am assuming it was. I can't testify to that.
Well, let me ask you, did you give that security key to Justice Lawfrey?
No, I did not.
Okay. The printer that was installed, is that a wireless printer?
Just based from memory, I think it was dual. I think it was wireless and wired.
So if any instrument in the household is linked up to the wireless internet, it could send something to that printer to be printed?
Yes, if it was configured that way, yes, it could.
Do you know if there's a log or anything on one of the printers that you installed to be able to show what types of things are printed, whether it be a photograph or documents?
Just knowing how printers work, yes, more than likely there is a log.
And where would that log be stored? Would that be on the office computer, in the printer, in the kitchen computer? Where would that log be stored?
The log should be in the printer.
And just to clarify for the record, on site survey, your first visit to Justice Lawfrey's house, it's my understanding, and I just want to make it clear for the record, that Justice Lawfrey designated the locations of the computers, desktop computers.
Correct.
On any of the occasions, and I'm going to just say 1, 2, 3, and 4, the 4 times that you've been out there, were any of his family members there?
Yes, but I can't say which visit. May have passed his son in the hallway and his wife in the living, but I can't say exactly which visits. I'm sorry.
Fair enough. And the only follow-up question to that is, did you ever have any conversations with them about the computer, username, passwords, things on the computer?
No, I did not.
Were you present for any conversations that any of the other IT individuals that were there might have had with the family members?
I do not recall any of those conversations.
Okay. Was the computer in the kitchen family room area the only, what you quoted, a shared computer?
Can you repeat?
Was it the only one that had multiple usernames, login information?
No, his office computer would have multiple logons, but those were court-related logons. The computer, the shared computer as it's referred to, would also contain a logon, which is the administrator account, that a court employee would know that username and password.
And that was going to be my question, because I'm not an IT guy. Is there administrator access to both the one that was in the family room and kitchen and the office?
I believe there's local access, but I can't testify that there's remote access. In other words, they would have to be in the house to log on to it.
That answers my question. Thank you. Now, the delegate down here mentioned to you earlier about the JIC complaint. I understand that you haven't seen that one, but I'm going to ask you a few questions about it. Were you ever involved in any hard drive removal of the family room kitchen computer?
No, sir.
Were you ever present for any download of the hard drive or view of the hard drive?
Not that I recall.
Did you ever view anything in any of your visits at the Lawfrey house regarding what was on the desktop computer in the kitchen family room area?
Me personally at the Lawfrey house, no.
So you never have signed on and looked at the screen and said, well, here's this link to this, there's a desktop icon for this game or anything of that nature?
That is correct. I was not there.
Were you ever told about it by any of your IT employees about anything being on the desktop computer, either in the kitchen or in the office?
Yes.
Okay, and tell me a little bit about what they told you after a site visit, what was on. We'll start first with the desktop in the kitchen family room area.
One of the techs had to perform maintenance on the computer, and later he had told his direct supervisor about some type of game that was installed, and that person relayed the information to me.
And I think you testified earlier you didn't recall what the game was.
No.
Fair enough. Did any of them ever report to you any browser history that was on the desktop in the kitchen family room area?
No, sir.
Is that something that's able to be viewed through the hard drive of what the browser history would be through the internet?
If there's a backup of the hard drive or a copy of the hard drive, yes, I'm sure computer forensics could find that information.
Were there ever any conversations with any of the IT employees about family photographs being on the desktop in the family room kitchen area?
Yes, that was relayed to me that there was a lot of photographs.
We don't need 10 minutes, so I don't want everybody to leave. 10 seconds.
I think that's all I have right now. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I've been informed we need a minute to change out the batteries, so please be at ease just for a second as we change out the microphone batteries. Back in order? All right. Delegate Fluharty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very briefly, just so we're clear, I believe you testified, did Justice Lawfrey come to you directly and ask you to set up this home system for him?
I don't know if it was directly or via email.
But the communication came from Justice Lawfrey?
Yes.
So there was no in-between between Justice Lawfrey and he didn't just say, hey, I need this set up, somebody came to you. He came to you directly, either via email or another direct communication?
Correct.
And
I may have been called up by the administrative assistant, but...
Okay. And you said, I believe there were multiple access points in his home?
Wireless
be
or
installed?
wired?
I'm trying to get an idea of what exactly was installed.
Okay.
When you say access points, normally you just have one, but there was more than one access point in his home?
No, it is one access point. It's built in wireless and wired connections.
Okay. There were multiple PCs then that were installed?
Correct.
Okay. And was that above and beyond what the other justices had in their home?
To my knowledge, it was.
And did you feel that was out of the ordinary?
How do you determine out of the ordinary?
That's for you to determine, not for me.
Right, and I can't.
But so you didn't get the feeling that this was above and beyond, he wasn't asking or requesting anything outside of the ordinary by your estimate?
There's no policy to say that it's out of the ordinary, so no, I did not think it was out of the ordinary.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Delegate Lovejoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of questions. You mentioned earlier that this computer in the home of the justice could connect, I think you used the term, the court technology system. Is that
The office computer?
Yes.
It has a VPN client which secures the network from his house to the court, so there can be no man in the middle looking at data.
So for instance, is it the virtual equivalent of sitting at your desk in your office at the Capitol?
It is.
And so if you were going to need to pull up briefs or anything you could pull up in your Capitol office at, say you're working at midnight, you could pull it up at your home.
That is correct.
And if you're working on the weekend to prepare for, an argument docket on Monday, you would have access to all of the digital data just as though you were sitting in your office?
That is correct.
Now, in the JIC report, there are a couple there's a couple pages that deal with this computer, and the person who's involved is not identified by name, but rather by role. So I want to see if you're this person. The report mentions 2 Supreme Court desktop computers valued between $800 and $1,200 a piece. Now, did you provide that value?
No, I did not.
Do you agree with that value?
With the age of computers, technology changes by the hour. I would assume the cost to be lower at this moment.
But at the time that these computers were installed in early 2013, were they likely to be valued between $800 and $1,200?
Yes.
And there also is reference to a new printer that was valued between $400 and $600. Would you believe that to be a fair estimate in 2013 of the value of the printer?
I would, but I would have to also research the model of the printer and check costs during that time.
Fair enough. Then the next paragraph discusses a Supreme Court network engineer who set up these local computer accounts. Would that be you?
No.
Okay. And I think you've described what an account is simply a login identification for a person on a computer?
That is correct.
You're not, for instance, purchasing some additional paid account, but rather if my child wants to get on a computer, I can set up an account for that child so they don't have access to other things on the computer.
That is correct.
All right. Then it references a network engineer went to the home on several occasions to service the computer, and there's a series of question and answers, almost like a transcript. And it's hard, I don't have a copy to show you, and I don't know if you have, okay, you don't have it in front of you, but there's questions, for instance, there's a question, what was the problem with it? And this is with regard to those service calls. Answer, a lot of times it would just be like maybe the hard drive was full. Were you interviewed by the JIC to create a transcript of questions and answers?
I was interviewed by JIC.
Okay. There was a question in here about games on a computer, and it mentions a bunch of just random free games you would see online. Do you remember providing that information?
No, sir.
Is your memory consistent that when we talk about games, there were some random free games that you would see online?
I have seen random free games online.
Did you see random free games online on these computers that were installed?
No, I did not.
Okay. Let's see here. And I think Delegate Byrd got an answer to this. I want to make sure. It appears that one of these computers was sent to the court's information technology unit, and there was an image of the hard drive, but you didn't participate in that because you probably were gone in February of 18?
Yes, I was gone.
Okay. I have no other questions. Thank you.
Delegate Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Harvey, do you happen to remember who the internet provider was?
No, sir. I just used Suddenlink as an example.
Okay, and it wasn't, I mean, I think Frontier would have had to have been DSL probably at that time, or Suddenlink would be your cable provider, so it has to be, if it's DSL, it would have to be Frontier, and cable would have to be Suddenlink in Charleston, I believe.
Correct.
And was it cable, internet, or?
I do not recall. I'm thinking it was cable, but to testify to that, I can't.
Okay, and when you went there, it was already installed, the internet was already installed?
Yes.
And that was, I think you answered counsel what year that was. I don't think you remember the date, but the year.
I could only give a range.
Okay, so that would be, it'd have to be after 2012, I would assume.
Correct.
Okay, I'm just trying to get at where an invoice for the internet or cable or all that would be and who it would be from if we would have to subpoena or look for that somewhere is where I was trying to go.
All of the work that was done by the technology folks at the court, that should be tracked through the financial management area of the court.
Yeah, you wouldn't, we asked, I think there was a question earlier if you were aware who was paying for it, but that wouldn't have come through your department. That would go through finance or some kind of, whoever the accountant for the court is.
That is correct.
Okay. We've asked you about a desk in the house. Did you happen to, I mean, it sounds like you went all through the house and through the basement to run lines and all that, and you were around the house quite a bit. Are you aware of, do you recall a memory of what was in the house, just roughly, like if I asked a couple questions and of things that may have been there, may not have been?
You can ask your questions, but again, if I remember, yes, I can testify to that.
Were there,
but as I answered before, I know there was furniture, but to pinpoint if it was this desk, I can't do that.
What about maybe some odd photos or framed items in the home?
Not an odd photo. I made a comment about one photo because it was as soon as you walk in.
What was that?
It was a wedding picture. The reason it caught my attention, there was a castle. And I said, oh, that's a really cool castle.
Anything else that you recall that was framed on the wall or anything interesting?
No, sir.
No, possibly a book cover that was framed or something like that you recall?
No, if I seen it, it didn't catch my attention.
Okay. Maybe, okay. And the reason you were there is to connect them to the database for the Supreme Court, correct?
Yeah, I had a job. I wasn't looking at the furniture.
Yeah, I understand. So, but you were there to connect the computer to the database, and you say you installed access for 3 computers.
Right. It was to connect the office computer to the court network.
Is there any policy of how a justice or any other court employee is supposed to act when on a server, a database, or a computer that has access to those, that they're supposed to keep those secure or something like that?
I have not seen any policy.
Okay, so there's no something that they say that, you know, this, if you have access, just for, say for a court employee, if you have access on your home computer to work from home and you're accessing the database, you should keep that secure and away from any family member or friend or anything like that?
Right, no policy, but we took it upon ourselves to make sure if someone was making that connection from home to the court, that there was a VPN client that would secure that connection. Okay, what kind of things are on that server? I mean, I assume it's at times private matters or not things that aren't for public eyes, things that relate to hearings and proceedings and things like that? I can't testify. I never browsed that area of the server. It was only if there was a problem with it. Okay. But to tell you what kind of documents, it wasn't my area. Okay. And now the computer that was in the kitchen and the others that were found, that I believe we've referenced another report, the JIC report, that had some games and things on them. Did those have access to the secure server of the Supreme Court? No, they did not. They did not. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Delegate Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Harvey, thanks for coming in probably what's less than comfortable situation or The, in regard to the networks that were pre-installed and your site surveys of all the justices' homes, I think you testified that you did a site survey for Justice Lawfrey to see if it was, and I'll use my words, up to standards to be able to access the court's network. Is that fair to say?
It is. You have to determine what you're dealing with before you install the network. You know, do we have to buy a special drill to drill through 6 feet of concrete? So you want to know that ahead of time.
Now, in regard to the other justices' homes that you went into to make sure that they had computer access, you testified that you didn't have to set up a network or offer wiring or installation into their homes?
If any of that was done, it was before my employment at the court.
So you weren't asked to do any kind of work in any other justices' homes, similar to what you did at Justice Lawfrey's?
No, sir.
Okay. In regard to the desktops that you can recall, did the court purchase those computers in 2013 specifically for Justice Lawfrey, or were they already in stock and they were just pulled out, they were used computers that were taken to his home?
I can't testify completely to that, because if it was in stock, then it was used out of stock. If it was something that we needed to order, then it was ordered.
You don't recall if he specified a particular type of computer, or you were directed to provide a new computer or computers to the Lawfrey residents?
No, I can't testify to that.
Okay.
Not without the documentation, which is at the court.
The computers that were installed, were those offered to Justice Lawfrey by any member of administration or staff, or did he say something along the lines, I need computers installed at my house? Did he make that direction, or was that offered to him, if you know?
In my dealings, he asked for the computers. I don't know if he talked to administration prior to that. I can't testify to that.
But he initiated that sequence of events for him to get computers installed in his home?
Correct.
Okay. I think you talked a little bit earlier about computer access, possibly not set up in ideal locations, things like that. When you made the installation and the wiring was installed at the Lawfrey home, were you given direction as to specifically where to install computer access points?
Yes.
Who made that direction?
It was Justice Lawfrey.
Did he give you any indication as to why he wanted specific computer access points put at a specific location?
No, he did not.
Did he lead you to believe why he wanted them at any particular location?
It was a shared area, and the other one was an office area. So it was separating that shared area from the office area.
Are you of the belief that was that specific location in the shared area, we'll call it, in the kitchen/family room, was for his family rather than for a workstation?
Evidence later on would suggest that.
Okay. The two desktop computers that were installed that you're familiar with and positive of, you're not sure about a laptop, but you're sure about two desktops. Is that correct? Were those wired computers to have internet access?
To my knowledge, they were.
But you also testified that you installed a wireless router in the residence as well for Justice Lawfrey?
That is correct.
Which was not needed for the desktops?
That is correct.
Is it normal for a wireless router to be installed for laptops to be utilized throughout other parts of the house?
Yes, if a justice has a laptop with wireless capability that they use on the bench or in their office, then at times they may have that laptop at their home, which would allow them the wireless access.
But in this case, he had two desktops that were wired and not wireless.
Correct.
So if there was a wireless router there, it leads us to believe that there was an additional laptop computer to access that network as well.
Yes, but I cannot testify to that.
Understand. Thank you. Something that came up a little earlier that's intrigued me. There was a reference made to JRP Consulting, I believe Mr. Pritt.
Yes.
That was employed by the court?
John Pritt. He was a consultant that was hired by the court.
What was his function?
Initially, it was to help out with any IT needs and put him on a task. I believe it was a scanner/printer that he needed to set up for an area at the court.
In regard to his responsibility, he's a contractor, is that correct?
Yes, he is a contractor.
As far as his responsibilities, was it primary software, networking, hardware, IT, installation, field work? What would you characterize his function with the Supreme Court?
It was more of an analyst area, but, you know, he wore multiple hats also. He had experience in setting up projects, setting up printers, experience with examining how something would work in a network environment.
Okay, that gives us his training and background, but what did he do?
The initial was set up of the project. It was a scanning/printing. I forget which floor it was on. I'd have to refer to documentation that I don't have. And after that, he was transitioned into an area because that was finished. I didn't have any work for him to do. He was transitioned into studying the OASIS project coming into the court. Were there particular milestones for that project? No.
His original assignment, in your opinion, being the director, was that needed to bring on a consultant? Or did you not have staff that were capable of doing what he was brought on to do?
Yes, we had staff that were capable of doing that. You know, basically, I was told you need to hire this individual to do this.
Who told you that?
At that time, it was my director.
And what was his name?
Steve Canterbury.
Do you have any knowledge as to if he received direction from anyone in order to hire Mr. Pritt or JRP Consulting?
Yes, he told me that he received word to hire this person.
That he received direction from someone else in order to hire Mr. Pritt?
Correct.
Do you have any idea as to who gave that directive?
It was Justice Workman.
So Justice Workman directed Mr. Canterbury to hire Mr. Pritt, even though you had staff that were capable of doing the job?
Yes.
Did you have any conversations with Mr. Pritt during his employment?
Several. We had verbal contact and email contact.
Did he make any comments to you to indicate how his employment as a contractor to the Supreme Court came about?
Not how his employment came about. He did mention that he had worked the Workman campaign in the past.
So Mr. Pritt had worked on Justice Workman's election campaign to the Supreme Court?
That's what he had told me.
Did he indicate that that's why he was employed by the Supreme Court subsequent to working on her campaign?
No, he did not say that.
Did he lead you to believe that?
No.
Do you know if he had a personal relationship as far as being friends with Justice Workman outside the campaign efforts?
Just through verbal conversations, he alluded to that they were friends.
They were friends. In your job as the Director of Technology, was part of your responsibility for monitoring or coordinating online activity for the Supreme Court of Appeals, such as the e-filing system, things such as that?
I was not involved in the e-filing system.
Were you involved with other online type access from the public or attorneys or the courts or things like that?
Yes.
Were you involved in any type of monitoring or setup or supervision of any programs whereby that individuals having access to the courts could purchase information, data, or in any way transmit money or funds to the Supreme Court?
Yes, it was a project that was started. I'm trying to remember the time frame, but yes, there was a project that we had started to sell information from the magistrate court system.
What kind of data would that have been?
It would be any kind of magistrate court case information that is available to the public. So to give a better access means, you could put it online and then charge to access that information instead of getting in a vehicle and driving to the courthouse.
So the public could access the magistrate court records, pay a fee, and get those records in lieu of making a personal visit to the courthouse?
Correct.
Okay. You say you started that. Is that system in place now?
I do not have knowledge that it is in place.
Okay. Specifically with the charges that a citizen would incur for accessing the magistrate court records, do you know how the system would have been set up, or with the way it was anticipated, where those charges, if I were to access it and I paid a fee, where that money would go?
No, we'd set up a meeting with the treasurer, John Perdue, and that meeting was to determine how the payment system would work.
When you say we, who would you be referring to?
That would be myself and at that time Director Johnson.
Okay. So you were wanting to set up a system, an online system where people could buy information?
Correct.
What was the context of your meeting, or the pretext of your meeting with Treasurer Perdue?
It was to determine the payment system on this particular website that was going to be developed and how it would flow. You know, did the money flow from this system to the auditor, or did it go through the treasurer? It was to determine the flow of funds.
Where did the court desire the money or the funds to be sent to when they made an online transaction?
There were talks that they wanted it to be internally.
To the Supreme Court?
Correct.
Did you find out during your meeting with Treasurer Perdue that that was contrary to state policy?
Correct. He spoke up and said, no, you can't do it that way.
Did you get the idea that that would have been illegal for the court to have set that system up in that manner?
I don't know about the legality of it, but I know Treasurer Perdue said, no, you cannot do it that way.
Do you know if that system was enacted against his directive, or that's, I mean, at least while you were in the employment of the Supreme Court?
No, at that time, we got busy on other projects, and it was kind of pushed to the back. That's
of the justices of the Supreme Court at the time. Were you approached in order to try, without naming any names, were you approached in order to try to put any kind of influence on the treasurer to solicit his support to sign off on authorizing the Supreme Court to get these funds directly to them instead of going through the state coffers?
I don't think it was to influence to have the funds brought into the court, but I was strongly told to get John Perdue to sign off on the document that the court had. Very strongly.
Is it fair to say threatened?
I was told that if I didn't get John Perdue to sign the document, that I would be fired.
Understand. Did that come from, at the time, Justice Lawfrey, Justice Davis, Justice Workman, or Justice Walker?
No.
Did you have any further contact with the with our state treasurer after that meeting in regard to this this concept or this project?
Yes, the document was reworked by the court, and eventually it was determined that the flow of payment would go through the treasurer's office, and I believe to the auditor's office, and Mr. Perdue or his staff signed off on the document.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Harvey. I think that's all I have.
In case there's any question about the method to my madness here, I'm trying to avoid the same person being last every time we go around the room. So I'm going to start on this end of this side of the row and begin with Delegate Overington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for being here as well.
Thank you.
I want to back up. You only did a site survey and installation where you did the drilling and preparation for Justice Lothrop. The other three before Justice Walker had all been elected before, so that site survey and that work would have been done in advance when they were first elected, I assume.
Correct, it's an assumption. I would assume that it was done prior to me being in charge.
And that was 2011 when you became director for technology, so that all that work would have been done previously by whoever was your predecessor.
That is correct.
And I guess with Justice Walker, she was elected last year, so are justices allowed to do that work privately, or does it have to be done through your office?
I have seen no policy that says either way.
You said that there is no official written policy for the services that you provide at home for justices. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Is there an expectation that that is a service that all of the Supreme Court justices are entitled to and actually expected to use?
As an individual, I feel it is an expectation.
And I guess for security reasons, the expectation is it would be better to have you and the Supreme Court staff doing it rather than trying to set it up on a private, by a private organization.
That is correct.
Do all 5 justices have home connections that gives them full access to the Supreme Court records?
At this time, I can't testify to that. I've been gone over a year, almost a year.
At the time that you left, did all of them have access?
No. Justice Walker did not, to my knowledge, have anything at her home to access the court.
Do they have access at the Capitol to their private accounts as well?
Define private accounts, is
Their
that
own personal access. If, for example, they wanted to, if they were here and wanted to check to see, if there were any family private emails that they wanted to keep up with or check, or does it go both ways, where at home they have obviously their private system as well as access to the state system, and here do they have the same?
From the court to their homes, no. To check their personal email, if it's web-based, they can open a browser and log into their email, their personal email. But to take a court computer and access their home network, that doesn't exist to my knowledge.
So that would have to be done through maybe their own smartphone or some other system.
Correct.
When you're establishing a person's home connection with the state system, so you'd be providing the whole realm of benefits, whether it's surge protectors or different ways to make sure that their system, whether it's private or their public system through the courts, would be adequate and protected with all the types of devices that would be needed to operate it at home.
Correct. If it's a state-owned piece of equipment, we do want to protect it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Foster.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Harvey. Kind of what I wanted to go through with you is some of how this is set up at the justices' houses. And first of all, when they're set up, you all do the wiring at the house and possibly a router and the computers. Who pays for the wiring, the router, the computers? Is that the tech department?
It's invoiced. I mean, we can't go out and directly purchase anything without it being state funded. So that would be invoices brought in by the tech department and turned into the finance department of the court.
But they are purchased through an invoice by the tech department and paid for by someone else?
Correct.
They are paid for by the state?
That is correct.
And that would include everything at any one of the justices' houses, being it wiring or computer, and I believe we talked about printers, routers, and the like.
That is correct.
And how many justices, while you were in employment there, had a computer, a personal desktop computer at their house?
You mean the number of items, or
no, just how many had a desktop computer at their home?
It was either a desktop or a laptop, and it was all justices with the exception of Justice Walker.
And the laptops, did all of them have a laptop? And not whether it was at home, but I mean, obviously that could be carried to the court, back to home. Did all of them have a laptop that was purchased by the court?
No, it was either a laptop or a desktop.
Okay, how many of them had the laptop?
I can't testify to that number.
Right, and what my question there then is, I want to go into whenever you all did the installations of these laptops, desktops, printers, wiring, did you all keep track of, like, for example, in my company, we do it by a work order. A work order is issued, you complete the work, keep track of the materials that were used, and then I guess that would be on the invoices to the financial?
Most of the time it's tracked on a project number.
Project number?
Yes.
And how would we access these project numbers or identify them for the setup at the justices' homes?
You would have to get that information from the court and ask them for all project numbers associated to the justices.
Okay. So that is something we could have access to?
I can't speak for the court.
Okay. And those would be, they would just be a project number, and how would we identify it as being related to those installations?
There should be some kind of text identifying that number as related to work being done either at a justice's home or justice's office.
And then going on from that, I also wanted to point out something we talked about yesterday is West Virginia Code 6B25B, and this relates to a public official using something for private gain, and that's what's prohibited under our Ethics Act. Well, how many justices' homes do you recall? Like at my home, there's a cable connection that comes in, goes into a modem, and then it would go into a router, which would either have maybe up to 4 ports for where you could hardwire a connection, or also do a wireless, if the router was wireless, which many of them are now. How many homes did you actually have to install a router at the home? Or would that be something we would find out from these project numbers?
You would have to find out from the projects, because I can only testify to one.
Which one that you were personally involved in?
Correct.
And then the others may have been done before you were employed there?
That is correct.
And these routers, it's something that can be accessed by, if they're accessing it with their laptop, say that they're able to carry from their home to the court and back, they have to have a login to be, or a password to be able to log into it, correct?
To gain wireless access, yes.
And couldn't that be done on any device? If you had an iPad or something, that could be done, basically therefore used on a personal device as well, that if they had a wireless router installed in there?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And when these routers are installed, I mean, there would be no need for, if you had wireless access through a router, there would be no need for a personal service, because it could be used by anyone within the home if they just had the login.
That is correct. If they had the security credentials to gain access to that device.
But security credentials, that would just be a password, correct?
Yes.
It's not like you all are actually verifying the IP address of the device.
You are correct.
Okay. And then I wanted to go into kind of how it's set up. You mentioned a VPN. So, for example, you have, if I'm familiar with how these things work, the computer is actually just, your login to the computer is just like mine would be Jeff Foster, and I'd set up a password. Well, whenever you log into that, that's just getting you onto the computer. And then you would have either a desktop icon or in your system a login to the VPN, which would be verified as IP-based. So they could not, because whenever we access files securely into our network from my office, you have to log into the VPN, and that VPN is a separate server that actually shows you a different screen, as in a desktop. Is that how it worked? As in, it would be their desktop server, desktop that had all their access to their files and access to the court network on that VPN, so they had to securely log into the VPN from their computer?
Correct. We can't pin it down to an IP address because suddenly they don't use static addresses. So your home IP address can change periodically. So you can't really secure that. The VPN is to establish a secure tunnel from that computer to the court network. Once that tunnel is established, then you can use a program, which remote desktop you can log on to the desktop located at the court.
And that's what my company does as well. We can log on from different locations, and my question is the security of that. When you set up a home address, you can't verify the IP. For example, when I take my computer home from work, or I'm not at a work location, I can't log in and access our secure files. Whereas if anybody were to log on, even through an iPad or anything, let's just say that they were able to get the login credentials for a Supreme Court justice or somebody that was employed at the court, they could log on and access those files from the home no matter what.
Yes, you are correct. If there was a breach and someone had the username and password, yes, they could access something remotely.
And is that something that concerns you, that we're setting up an area that's not secure, as in the IP address can't be secured, where anybody can log in at a personal residence? Is that something that would concern you?
That's why we would have a court-provided computer, because we know that computer is handled by us, and that particular computer is secure to us.
And that's where my other question is, with the router, say, for example, if it was a laptop or something, they could log on from a different device and access that, correct?
They would have to have the software.
Okay.
So if you connected your iPad to an outside area, you would have to have the VPN. You would have to know which address to point that VPN to. You would have to know the username and password. Now, once you secured that to do the remote desktop, you would also have to know which computer to connect to, which username to use, and which password to use.
Okay. And that's where, with the what I'm wondering is, with the login on the computer, the VPN is the only one that is really, I guess we could classify as public use versus personal. If they log on to just the computer and they're downloading something onto there or using it for personal email or something, that wouldn't be shown on the VPN login server, correct?
That is correct.
So realistically, that would be a court-supplied computer that could be used, just the login, which even as an administrator, they could create other accounts for a child or a wife or something.
That is correct.
So it could be used for personal use. If it was used for anything other than accessing that VPN, could that technically be called personal use or personal gain?
If you want to define it as personal use, yes, I could log onto a computer, I could download something and use it without it being court-related, yes.
And that would be whether it was one computer, two computers, that would be at which all the justices, when you were there, except for Justice Walker, had at least one computer that had
correct
this on it. All right, thank you. And I had one more. Is there any way we can try to get these project numbers from the court that's related to the installations in the home?
Yeah, we'll further explore that. Yes.
Thank you.
Delegate Sabonia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Harvey, you testified to our counsel in the initial testimony that Justice Lawfrey had made the request to you to come into his home. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I was also asked by my director to check with Justice Lawfrey and see what he needed.
Okay, that was my follow-up question. I imagine that justices are busy and they just don't have time to pick up the phone to call IT for certain things. Was Mr. Canterbury in contact with you for Justice Lawfrey or any of the other justices to go into their home? Did he make contact with you or make any requests?
Yes, but the way you phrased it, you said to go into their home. It may not be going into their home. It may be working on their office computer. Sometimes Steve Canterbury, sometimes Gary Johnson, the administrative directors, they would say, hey, Scott, this justice needs you to work on this computer.
So was there any written approval of, when you say there were project numbers, was there a process in place that someone had to sign off on that to authorize it, or you just had someone pick up the phone, or they just sent you an email, or they just saw you in the hallway? How were those project numbers initiated, and what type of approval had to be made or done?
Anytime there was a project that came up, we would ask for a project number, and the approval of that was either signature approval or verbal approval. There's been both.
So these project number information that the records that we may obtain may not indicate who actually made the request and who actually approved it. Is that correct?
I think most of them contain text description of such and such asked for this to be done. We're going to assign this project number to this task.
Do you have any recollection when Justice Lawfrey had the second computer placed in his home, if that project number that was issued, did Mr. Canterbury have any knowledge of that second computer?
I think the computers were delivered at the same time.
So do you have any recollection that Mr. Canterbury would have authorized it or had any type of knowledge? Is there any email or paper trail to indicate that Mr. Canterbury, being the administrator of the court, would have knowledge of that second computer?
I'm sure there's email trails, and I'm sure there's paper trails.
Okay, so that's something that we could obtain from the court? Email.
I can't speak for the court. You can, whatever process you use to obtain that information.
My next question is that, knowing that there would be a second computer installed that may be not protocol for other justices, that was installed in the home of Justice Lawfrey, could there have been a firewall installed in that second computer to prevent gaming and personal items being downloaded? Could that have been done, since it was a state-issued computer?
Are you asking me theoretically could have we done that, or was
Yes.
it done?
Yeah, could there have been a firewall installed to prohibit certain gaming? I know in some employers put firewalls on employer-issued computers so that employees can't sit there and do gaming or Facebook. Could that have been done?
It could have been, but with someone having administrative access to the computer, if they wanted to, they could uninstall the firewall.
Okay, and then my last question is, you testified, I believe, and let me know if I'm wrong, that you went into Workman's home one or more times, into Justice Davis's home 4 times, you believe. And then Justice Lawfrey, I think you testified 4 visits possibly. You were the director at some point of IT. Do you possibly, would you have sent a subordinate and not have actually gone into the homes on your own?
Yes, it's very possible, but we all wear multiple hats. It's not just you're pinned down to one specific task. If subordinates are busy, I would step up and do the work.
Okay, so when you testified that you only recall going into Justice Lawfrey's home 4 times, or Justice Davis's home, or Justice Workman's, it could possibly be that there were multiple times that someone from IT within the Supreme Court went to their homes. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, and then my last question, you stated that you were employed by the court October 2005 to November 2017. What led to your ceasing of employment with the Supreme Court? Did you resign? Did you find another job? Was there pressure put on you when you testified previously about you were told you would be fired if you didn't get a certain project completed?
All of your questions, yes.
Okay. Thank you. No further questions.
Okay.
Delegate Fast.
Thank you, Mr. Harvey, for your candor. Again, There were no written policies regarding home office equipment in justices' homes at all?
To my knowledge, no.
Okay. In all your tenure there, you did not ever see any or know of any? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Where is Justice Lawfrey's home situate? What street? Do you remember the street name?
It is toward the airport, and at the top of the hill you make a left. That's all I can remember.
Okay. This second computer that we're referring to that was not in his home office but was in a more common area, did Justice Lawfrey specifically direct that it not be connected to the Supreme Court network?
I do not recall him directing that it not be connected.
Okay. Was it connected to the Supreme Court network?
No, it was not.
Okay. Who would have made that decision to connect it or not connect it?
It was basically put to me that I need another computer.
Okay. If you were there installing Supreme Court computers and hardware, wouldn't you assume that we're going to connect them all to the Supreme Court network?
You could make that assumption, but as far as being directed to not put it on the court network, no. Suggested, maybe.
Were you directed or suggested to just connect them all, everything to the Supreme Court network, printers, everything?
No, it was not.
Okay, so neither way.
Well, I was not directed to not connect the shared computer. I was suggested to not connect.
How were you suggested?
Maybe along the lines, and don't quote me on the exact text, but I would prefer this computer not to be associated on the Supreme Court network.
Did you make any notations of that anywhere?
No.
So that wouldn't show up on any of the work orders, things like that?
No.
Do you have a vivid memory of such a conversation? You said don't quote you on the exact language. Anyone else hear this? Where were you standing in the home?
It could have been overheard, but I don't recall that conversation happening in the home.
It could have been what?
It could have been overheard by someone, but overheard.
Overheard, okay.
But I do not recall that conversation happening in the home.
Do you recall it happening somewhere else?
At the court.
Okay. Was this, did this come across to you as something that was hopefully secret, or was it just unprotected conversation?
I don't recall it being secret. It was just a mention of this computer, shouldn't be connected to the court network.
Were you concerned in your position as the database administrator? Well, yeah, you were a database administrator at that time, correct?
No, I was the director at that time.
Director of technology. Were you concerned as the director of technology that wasn't right? Or
I'm sure I had a concern, but when this is your supervisor telling you this is what I suggest or this is the way I want it, then you do it.
Did you raise issues with anyone else, any of the other justices or the court administrator, that we've got a second computer being put in here that's not connected to the network?
Raise concerns? No.
Okay. Something besides raising concerns. Did you do anything?
No. I mean, basically fear tells you to do the job or you suffer the consequences.
Were you afraid, or did it even strike you as odd, or did you just, okay, no problem, and move on? I mean, were you afraid on this particular point?
I would say, yeah, there was some fear.
Why were you afraid?
Of not doing the right job.
Okay. Were you thinking that I'm being told to do something illegal, but I'm going to do it or lose my job? Were those the thoughts going through your mind?
I never thought about it being illegal.
Okay.
But I thought about it being my morals.
Okay. Justice Workman, do you know when her home computer was installed?
No, sir. I don't have access to that documentation.
That was before your time?
Correct.
Okay. Did you ever go, I think maybe you said, but I'm not sure, did you ever go to her house to service her computer?
Yes, a couple of times.
Okay. And when you got there, how many computers were there? How many accessories, printers, anything like that?
I only remember one computer, and there was a printer, but I don't know if it was hers, the court's. I never had to service a printer.
Was that printer beside the computer?
I don't recall.
Okay. Did she have a router?
That I don't know, sir. I'm sure she did. She had an internet connection, but to say for sure, yes, I seen a router, I can't say that.
Is it commonplace when you have a computer to have a router?
Yes.
Okay. And if you have a desktop computer that's hardwired, why would anyone need a router? What would be the convenience or the purpose of having also a router?
The multiple connections. If you have a printer also that is wired, then you need 2 network ports to plug those items into.
Okay, and you do that through a router?
Router, hub, switch. They have a lot of names.
And if the justices have a laptop that they use here in this building and also they may take home, would that also be accessed in their home through the router?
Correct, either wired or wireless.
Okay, so they could plug it in with a USB, or they could go sit on the couch and use it wirelessly.
Right, not a USB, it would be a network cable.
Okay. You had mentioned Justice Davis. I think you were there 3 or 4 times.
Correct.
Okay. And how many, do you know when her computer was installed?
No, sir. It was before me.
Your time? Okay. So you were there just updating or working on it?
Any kind of issue with the computer.
Okay. How many computers, printers, or accessories did you see in her home?
I think I only seen the laptop. I don't remember seeing a printer. I'm sure there was a printer, but I can't testify that I seen a printer.
Okay. Why do you think there was you're sure there was a printer?
You have to print documents, so
okay.
I'm sure there was
commonplace.
a printer located somewhere.
Okay. And now are you saying there was a desktop computer? And when I say desktop, I'm talking about a hardwired desktop, the tower or something. Is that what we're talking about, a desktop computer?
At which house?
Davis. Just
No, it was a laptop.
laptop only. Did not see a desktop computer, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, would she have had a router there?
She could have. I didn't see it.
How would she access without a router using a laptop?
With a network cable.
Okay, so the only way that she could use a Supreme Court laptop in her home would be to, and access the Supreme Court network would be to plug it in?
No. If it was equipped with wireless, then she could have accessed it via wireless. If it was network cable, then she would have to access it with a network cable.
How do you access it wirelessly without a router?
That's what I'm saying. I didn't see the router. I don't know what's installed.
Well, to access it without a hardwire, you would have to have a router, correct?
Correct.
You just don't remember seeing a router, but if she's at her home going to access the network, Supreme Court network on her laptop, she would have had to have a router somewhere in that home.
If she did it wirelessly.
Okay. When you were there, did you work on her laptop?
As far as updating programs, updating the installation of Windows, maybe fixing a VPN client that had failed to work, just the normal problems that occur.
Was that Supreme Court stuff that you were working on?
Yes.
Okay, and when you were there working on it, was the computer plugged in or was it operating remotely?
I do not recall.
And again, if it was operating remotely the day you were there, it would have had been going through a router.
Right. If it was wirelessly on the network, yes, it would have been going through a wireless router. If it was plugged in, it would have been going through a cabled router.
Okay. Okay, you don't recall either. You don't recall. Okay.
I don't recall.
Now you said that when you went to Justice Lawfrey's house, there was a desk. But you can't verify if it's the desk there in the picture on you're looking at right now.
I believe he's already answered that question.
Right.
Can you move along?
I do have a question on that. Have you ever gone there and noticed that the desk that you did see, whatever it was missing?
No.
Okay, did you ever go there and realize that, hey, there used to be a couch sitting there, but now it's not there?
No.
Okay. Did the state in Justice Lawfrey's house incur any additional expenses other than the hardware and installation of this second computer?
I'm trying to think how to answer that. The only expenses incurred by the state would be the employee's time and the items provided.
Okay. Did you see accounts on this second computer, or I don't know that you saw other accounts besides Justice Lawfrey, but I think it was reported to you that someone else saw some accounts for people other than Justice Lawfrey?
Correct.
Okay. Was it reported to you through those channels that how many other people had accounts on that second computer?
I don't recall them providing me a number of accounts that had been created on the computer.
So you don't know, were there accounts for persons other than Justice Lawfrey that was reported to you?
It was reported to me that there were other accounts.
Okay. And you don't know how many?
No.
Okay.
Again, I was estimating earlier that I knew we had an administrative account and there were other accounts.
Now, you had mentioned it was reported to you there were games on the computer. Do you know how many games?
They didn't report a number of games. They just said there was games installed on the computer
And was
or
it
being played on the computer.
Was it reported to you that there were photographs on
Yes.
the computer?
It was reported that there was a large number of photographs.
Okay. Was it reported to you what these photographs depicted?
No, sir.
None whatsoever?
No, sir.
Just photographs? Okay. And that it wasn't delineated Supreme Court document photographs, for instance, maybe exhibits to a petition or a brief versus family picnic or anything else? It wasn't delineated?
No, it wasn't.
Okay.
It was just brought to my attention that there was a large number of photographs.
Was Justice Lawfrey, you would have been in your position when he first came on the bench, correct? To install a home computer?
Yes, I was director when he was on the bench.
Okay. Were you the proper person to contact to have a home computer system set up in his home at that time?
Yes.
Okay.
Delegate Fass, I'm going to ask you if you'll hold your remaining questions. We try to move along. You'll get a second bite at this apple, okay?
I just have about 3 more.
All right. I'm going to count. Go ahead.
Okay. The issue about Mr. Pritt being directed to be hired by Justice Workman, are there other instances? Well, first of all, he being hired, am I correct that you stated that his hiring was not necessary because the Supreme Court already had its own IT that could have done that work?
Right, in my opinion.
Okay. Are there any other instances where any justice issued a mandate that came down to you that resulted in unnecessary spending of state funds?
Not that I'm aware of.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Less than 3.
You saved one. All right. Go to the second row. Justice Harshberger.
Harshberger.
Delegate, I'm sorry.
We seem to all be moving up here.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one question. In your past capacities, IT director, you recall any of the computer equipment, printers, such that you worked on having asset numbers for inventory tracking?
Yes.
Okay. So there's a way to track what equipment went where and the age of it, the model, all that stuff?
Yes.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
And it's based upon the value.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, interesting. I was going to ask a similar question. So the computers would be inventoried by some sort of a barcode scan, something like that. Would the printers?
Again, it'd be based upon value.
So if it was, we heard this word yesterday, de minimis in value, or very, very virtually nothing, would it not be inventoried? Is that what you're getting? Is that what you're saying?
It would be inventoried, but not possess an asset tag.
So it would be in a notebook somewhere that this existed, but it wouldn't have a number that linked it. So if the printer was 123, we wouldn't know necessarily if it was over here or over there. Is that what you're...
Each serial number is recorded by the IT department on each piece of equipment, and that equipment is tracked as to its location. It may not possess an inventory tag or a asset tag, but that serial number is tracked.
Okay. And, okay, changing subjects just a little bit, and I'll be quick. So, kind of what Delegate Foster was talking about. So, our cable line comes in, and it hits a modem. Sometimes it's a modem and router all in one. And in this case, you installed a router at Justice Lawfrey's house to provide a wireless signal.
Correct. And additional Cat5 ports.
Right. So when we talk about you running cables, we're talking about essentially, I think I'm using it right, you're running Ethernet cables, correct?
Correct.
Through the house that connect into the back of a desktop or a laptop.
That is correct.
Okay. And generally, a desktop is provided with an internet capability through Ethernet. I understand you can actually put a wireless card in the back of one, but generally speaking, that's what you did here.
That is correct.
Okay. Would it be safe to say that an Ethernet connection is that more secure than a wireless connection?
I'm not a security expert, so I can't really testify to that.
If we're doing work over in the chambers of a Supreme Court justice, would you be drilling holes and running cable? I mean, is that something that your department would do, or is that something that Capitol Services would do, or is that something that would be contracted out?
It depends. It has been done both ways.
Okay, so you've performed that sort of work here. It just seems like so you were providing a lot of work that, for instance, if I wanted to get done, I would have Suddenlink or an electrician do, right? At my house?
That's your opinion.
Okay, sorry. That is my opinion. Okay. I think that's about all I have. And lastly, if I had a court-provided laptop that you had vetted or had installed all of the various security measures, VPN, icons, etc., as long as I had, and that laptop had a wireless card in it, so it was able to access. So as long as I had a wireless signal, could I access the court system through VPN?
Yes.
So it wouldn't matter if the internet was at my house. So theoretically, did you have to go to the Supreme Court justices' houses to perform the work? Or if they had come in and said, hey, here's my laptop, can you make sure my VPN works? Could they have brought it into the office? I'm saying, was it necessary to be at the house to do the work?
Based upon their schedules,
yeah,
it almost makes it necessary to go to their location.
Okay, and the reason I ask is not because it was, that you had to go. The reason I'm asking, I guess, is because the securitization of the system is not based on any hardware that is in the home of the justice, but rather it's part of the software that's on the machine, right?
That is a correct statement.
Okay, no further questions. Thanks.
Delegate Queen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Harvey, we're here to investigate maladministration, corruption, incompetency, gross immorality, or high crimes or misdemeanors committed by any specific justice. My question, I'm going to try to be as broad as possible. At any point, were you asked by specific justices to go beyond what you feel was your scope of work for the state?
And a very broad answer. There's no documentation to specify what my job at the court entailed. So to answer that, how can I answer it?
Sure. You mentioned earlier that you were, I'm going to use the term lightly, threatened to be fired. Were you ever threatened to be fired by, specifically from any justice?
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that at all?
Again, as I answered earlier, if I didn't get the treasurer to sign off on a document, that I would be fired.
Any other times other than that?
Who was it that threatened, do you remember?
I thought it did.
Talk to counsel for just a moment. Okay. Yes. Fear of my job from Justice Ketchum.
My last question is going to be a range of how many times that was?
Twice.
That you were threatened to be fired just once?
Twice that I know of.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Hanshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Harvey, thank you for being here for as long as you have this morning. Most of my questions have been asked. I will be very brief, I promise. Do I understand you to say that all of the work that you've performed that's been the subject of your testimony here this morning was performed by you and your colleagues in the court's IT office?
Yes.
No outside contractors or other state employees?
I do not recall any outside contractors.
Okay, thank you. In the scope of what your office handles, do I understand correctly that you handled IT needs for all the circuit court judges also, to the extent they had them?
We handled all ITs for the Supreme Court, IT needs, sorry, for the Supreme Court, the circuit court, family court, the magistrate court, and any other courts.
The entire system, okay.
Yes.
Thirdly, while you were employed as the IT director for our court system, did you have regular contact with the IT directors for some of the other statewide, I'm going to call them offices? And I'll ask the question a little more in an expanded form so you can get where I'm going with this. What I'm asking is it customary that statewide officials elsewhere in our government maintain home offices supported by IT directors and IT staff here in the Capitol? Or are you able to speak to that?
I can't really speak to that because the question never came up, but I did have communication not only with other IT leaders, but some of the contracted companies that the counties had. But the conversation of home offices never came up.
Okay. And lastly, were you expected to clear the work done by you and your staff through the administrative director, or were you reporting directly to the elected members of the court?
Both ways.
Both ways?
Right.
Okay, thank you. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Flashauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thing I wanted to check earlier when you were, and thank you so much for coming today. Sorry to have to put you through this. When you testified earlier, I couldn't hear very well. I think you said that you and or your staff were called to Justice Lawfrey's home much more frequently than the other justices. Am I remembering that correctly?
No, I did not testify to that.
Okay, is that true or not true?
Without the documentation to see how many times staff had to go to houses, it's hard to determine. But I don't think it was any more or any less.
Okay.
For problems. If there's a computer problem that arises, and again, I can't really testify to a number.
Okay, because I wasn't sure that I heard you correctly. I thought you said 40, but you must have said 4 times?
4.
That you personally went 4?
Correct.
But you also know that other staff members went, when you didn't go, to his home?
Correct.
And we had some testimony in that we have copies of that you probably don't, that you were asked some questions about that. One of the, and it wasn't you, it was a network engineer. Do you know who that might have been?
No, ma'am. It's kind of a broad statement.
Did you have several network engineers?
Yes.
That was a job title. Okay. One of the things that I believe is in that is that the 2 computers and the printer were brand new. Is that your recollection?
Yes.
Okay. And also in these records, there's an indication that people were called in to Justice Lawfrey's home because the hard drive on the shared computer was full, and that it was full of games and photos. Were you informed about that?
I was informed about the games and photos.
Okay, and do you know whether your staff went out there because the hard drive was full? That was one of the issues that had to be dealt with?
Yes, if the hard drive was full, then a staff member would need to visit the home.
Okay. Did any other justices have more than one computer at their home?
I do not recall any more than one computer at the other justices' homes.
Are you aware of whether any other justices allowed their family members to have access to the computers?
I wouldn't have knowledge of that, but looking at the other computers, it would not suggest that anyone other than the justice was on the computer.
And you did have knowledge that Justice Lawfrey allowed his child to use the computer?
Yes, it was reported to me that that was the fact.
And his wife?
I
want to say it was reported, but right now I can't.
You're less sure about that?
Right.
Okay. One thing I wrote down to ask you a question about, I have one page where I'm taking notes, and then it says that evidence later would suggest that. Do you remember saying that and what you were talking about?
What was the question?
I don't remember. I don't have the reference to that. And it was sort of left there. Does that ring a bell for you? I could go back and look.
Yeah, if we can find the question, I can elaborate.
Okay. We talked a bit about Mr. Pritt. Did Mr. Pritt go to any of the justices' homes that you know of?
I cannot testify to that. I have no idea.
So you didn't send him there?
Right.
Okay. I think in the papers and maybe in some discussions among legislators, there has been some surprise or concern, or maybe a great deal of concern, that rented space was renovated. The space that the court rented was renovated. I got the sense from your testimony that you felt that those renovations were necessary to maintain the security of the court equipment.
Yes, but I can only testify to the IT areas.
Okay.
And the IT area, it was needed.
Okay. So the locks?
The secure areas, yes, it's needed.
And the air conditioning?
Yes, ma'am. If you don't have air conditioning, your servers will overheat and shut down.
Okay, because I have to say, I was really surprised that there would be these renovations, but your testimony helped me understand that. What are the other things, do you think, if there were other things, that were needed to maintain that security?
Maintain the security?
At the city, is it City Center East facility? Yes.
Yeah, the security, there's key card access. So,
okay.
And it's monitored.
Okay, by a person.
And there's a recording of who enters this door based upon their key card access. Since the server room and servers within that room connect to various departments, example, State Police of West Virginia, ATF, then you want to monitor what's going on with that server room.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for explaining that to me anyway. When the two new computers and the new printer were installed at Justice Lawfrey's home, did he have another computer set up in his home?
My memory says there was a personally owned computer, but I can't say 100% sure.
Okay. So do you recall, or do you have reason to know whether he maintained that computer? You don't know one way or the other? Okay. Thank you.
Sorry.
Now you mentioned, I believe, that the shared computer had maybe access to an administrative account? You mentioned the administrative account. What did you mean by that?
What we do, it is a state-owned piece of equipment, so we set up an administrative account that the technicians know the username and password for that account. If they would have to get on that computer and do work, they would use that account instead of other accounts that were set up on the computer.
Okay, so that was for access for people to fix the computer.
Correct.
It wasn't for getting access to administrative records at the court.
That is correct.
Okay. So do you have knowledge of whether there were Supreme Court administrative records or any kind of records or any kind of court documents on the shared computer?
I do not have knowledge of that.
The only thing that you know from, or what do you think was on the shared computer?
The way it was reported to me was photos and games.
Okay. And I'm going to have to apologize. I was taking notes and I missed another question that you were asked, but I have a feeling you're going to remember this one. Your response to the question, and the question was, did you think that something was illegal? And you said you weren't thinking about that, you were thinking about how it might affect your morals, that it was a question that made you consider your morals. I don't remember what you were talking about. Can you share with the committee what you were referring to? I'm not sure I knew what you were talking about.
Right. If you're installing, and I believe the way the question was presented, if you're installing something and don't remember his name, he read the law that it pertained to.
Yes. That was the Constitution, which is what's provoked this proceeding.
Right. So if you're installing something that belongs to the state and you're told to do something that maybe questions your personal belief, which we don't want to bring into this, it's just my personal belief.
Right.
Versus illegal or legal.
Well, you're not a lawyer.
Exactly.
So what was it that made you wonder about your personal beliefs that you were asked to do?
To allow a family member to use a computer.
Okay, that's what I was trying to clarify. Thank you for answering that question, and maybe I will try to go back and see what this other reference was referring to. Mr. Chairman, if you want to start with your questions, I'm not even sure I'll be able to find it.
Sure. And Mr. Harvey, let me add my thanks to those you've already received. I know it's an endurance contest sometimes in this, and we appreciate your being here and your cooperation. I have a few questions. I'll try to get to the point. I know you were not involved in the financial aspects directly of the court. We've had some information that you may be able to shed some light on. The legislative auditor has done an audit of the operations of the court, and part of what we learned yesterday is that the contracted services at the court went from less than $200,000 in 2012 all the way up to about $6.5 million in 2016. And I'm wondering, from the standpoint of the technology end of things, did you notice any additional contracted services in that area of the operation of the court, other than this JRP consulting that you mentioned earlier?
Yes, I can only answer to the items that I was involved with.
Okay.
And that would be the statewide magistrate court system.
Can you just give us a brief description of what that project involved?
It was taking the entire magistrate court system from paper to electronic. And that is a very broad statement.
And they hired, when I say they, the court hired consultants or independent contractors to implement that project?
They were the programmers and kind of You would break it out into smaller projects. You can't eat an elephant in one sitting.
Sure.
So we have to break it out into smaller projects, and sometimes those folks that we brought in would be responsible for one piece of the entire project, whether it be programmers, analysts, right on down the line.
And over what period of time did that project consume, to the best of your recollection?
I believe it started in 2006 or 2007. And in 2011, my predecessor had brought one county onto the system. So from 2011 till my resignation time, we had finished the state. So,
okay. And so that might account for some of the increase in contracted services during that period. I'm sure you can't testify as to how much, but you think that probably was a need for additional costs in that area?
I do, and that cost should have went down once the project was finished.
Which would have been around the time you resigned?
June 21st of 2016, the last county was brought online. So from that point forward, you should see a steady reduction.
Were there any other circumstances in which you felt that the staff on hand in your department was adequate to handle assignments, but there were outside consultants or independent contractors brought in other than this JRP Consulting?
No, we were very busy. We needed all the help we could get.
I'm not sure that I asked that question clearly. Is it your testimony then that any other additional consultants or independent contractors that were brought in for purposes of IT work, they were necessary?
I would agree.
Okay. Then I did understand your answer, and I think you understood my question. The only exception to that would be this JRP Consulting, Mr. Pritt. Is that fair to say? Let me ask you this. You mentioned that you were interviewed by the Judicial Investigation Commission. Did that topic come up about JRP Consulting during those interviews?
I do not recall.
Okay. Has that topic come up in your interviews with any other agencies, authorities, or?
Yes.
And could you tell us with which agency or authority that topic has come up?
CSI.
Okay. I want to get to the area of the, well, let me ask this. The JRP Consulting, did that occur, or what time period did that occur roughly?
I can't even determine roughly without the documentation. I know I had email of correspondence of the dates.
Okay. Well, that's a good, I'm glad you opened that door, because we've mentioned documentation a number of times, but we really haven't specified exactly what documentation would preserve this information. Did you have, for instance, like a daily log when you would do a out of the Capitol type assignment?
We have a help desk system.
I'm sorry, a what?
Help desk system. It's where you log your tickets, when you have to work on something. And it would probably have some information in it.
Okay, so for instance, on these visits to the justices' homes, would those have been, outside the Capitol, would those have been logged into that system?
Possibly. I can't say 100% that all of them would be logged.
Well, what was the normal procedure, if you would tell me?
To give you an example, sometimes you're on the road and you get a call and you have to go to someone's house.
That makes sense. That makes sense. You are not required at the end of, say, each day or each pay period to preserve in some fashion, diary or otherwise, what you'd done during the preceding period?
No, sir.
Were you, I assume you were on salary during this period?
Yes.
Both from the time you were a database administrator all the way through your tenure as director of technology?
Correct.
Would any of the other individuals in that section who would have gone to Justice Lawfrey's home been on an hourly rate or based on salary? If you know.
Right. I can't really testify to that, but I would say everyone should have been on salary. It's
Best of your knowledge, they would have been on salary.
correct.
Okay. If we were to request the documents that you need to verify some of the issues that you've raised about, if I had the documents, I could be more specific. What would we call those documents?
It would be the project number documents, possibly copies of my email. And to verify help desk tickets, you would need copies of the help desk system, but it is rather large.
Would we be able to request excerpts from that system by your name or some identification number?
Yes, you should be able to.
Would it be by number or name?
It would be by name.
Okay. Getting back to this system, I'll call it a system, the project that you were pressured into getting the treasurer's signature on. You mentioned that you were threatened on, I think, two occasions, one of which was that. So I assume that that wasn't a regular occurrence, that you were threatened daily with being discharged. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say.
Okay. So what was the importance as you perceived it to that project that was so important that you were pressured to have the treasurer sign off on it?
Well, the way I perceived it, it was an opportunity for the court to bring revenue in. And as we know, the state needs all the revenue we can get.
What would have been the time frame of that? Best you can, I mean, was it near the end of your tenure?
2015, 2016 time frame.
Okay. Did anybody share with you the projection as to the amount of revenue that project might bring in?
No, we hadn't put a price on each record. I believe we had to present the project in 2015 or 2016 to a legislative committee.
And ultimately, if I understood your answer, some project was approved by the treasurer, but it was different than the one that you were pressured to get the treasurer to sign. Is that accurate?
It is. It was the mechanics of how the system would work. When presented to the treasurer, it was not in a form that he would approve.
Did the ultimate implementation of the project, when the form was changed, change the fact that the court would receive income from that project?
It basically stated the processing of payments would begin at the treasurer's website and follow through to the auditor's accounting system. That was my understanding of it. I'm not a financial expert.
And as the project was originally proposed, it would have bypassed both those steps? Is that correct or not?
It was building a payment processing system on our own rather than using the treasurer's.
So, for instance, if the auditor would normally audit those functions so that there's some transparency, it would have bypassed the ability of the auditor to follow those transactions as it was originally proposed?
I don't think so.
Okay. Can you clarify for me?
The money would have came in through this system and on to the auditor. That was my understanding.
Okay. The net result was the same after you made your revisions, though, that the court would receive additional income if this process was, if these data were sold.
It was stated that the state would receive more money. Okay. I don't think it was ever stated that the court would receive money.
And based on your best understanding, did that change in any way due to the configuration change that you...
It was just the mechanics of where the payment processing would take place.
All right.
And I think there was, again, I'm going out on a limb because I'm just remembering pieces of the document, a percentage of a payment that was withheld as a ease of use. And I think the treasurer has a set amount, or the state has a set amount that can be withheld.
And you may have said this, and I apologize if I just missed it, but who was it that made the threat to you that if you didn't get this signed by the treasurer, you might lose your job?
That was Justice Ketchum.
Both threats were made to you by Justice Ketchum, is that correct?
And one more direct.
Pardon me?
That one was more direct.
That one's more direct. Very well. The shared computer in the home of Justice Lawfrey, was it configured in a way that he could have worked from home and connected to the Supreme Court database on that computer? As I understood, you say that was not possible?
Not to my knowledge. That computer did not have the VPN client installed.
So there would have been no business purpose, and when I say business purpose, related to the court for that computer to be in the home. Isn't that fair to say?
That is fair to say.
Thank you. I think that's all. Mr. Allen, any questions?
No questions.
Mr. Carr?
No, sir.
Counsel, any follow-up? All right. Back to Delegate Pushkin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you so much for your testimony here today. No, it's not what you probably originally signed on for when you took an IT job with the state, but we really appreciate it, and I'll try to get through my questions as quickly as possible. Now, you were originally hired on, you said, as database administrator in 2005. What year was it that you became the director of technology?
It was 2011.
2011. It was asked earlier that the reason, maybe one of the reasons why you did a special installation only at Justice Lawfrey's residence was because other justices already had their computers set up. So I guess, well, since then, Justice Walker had been elected since you became the Director of Technology, but you didn't have to go do a special setup for Justice Walker?
That is correct. Justice Walker did not, at the time, did not request anything at her home. Now, if anything has happened later, I have no knowledge of that.
And I know this has been asked before, but and you stated it before. The reason the special installation was required was for the shared computer that you had to run a hardwire to, correct?
Correct. My employees did.
Okay. And it was asked, a few other folks asked questions about why they would need a wireless router, but also cell phones are also used from wireless routers. So if they wanted to have internet access from their cell phones in their house, that would be off their wireless router, correct?
That is possible if you have a...
Okay. You stated earlier that at doing a site inspection, one of the things would be to see if you needed to purchase any kind of special equipment for drilling. Did you need any special equipment for drilling?
No, we did not.
You did not. Okay. Okay. And let's see, you said that one of the visits you had to replace the hard drive in the shared computer. When that was done, do you know, were there any work files or anything that needed to be salvaged? And I'm not a computer person, so forgive me for if I say something wrong, but was there any evidence to show there was any official state work done on the shared computer?
I was not the person that performed that task, so I can't really answer to that question.
Okay. And it was asked if there was about any extra cost to the state, and that what you said it was just for the hours worked up there. But both computers were state property, correct?
Correct.
So go ahead.
Any equipment needed, and the workers.
So the extra computer was at a cost to the state. Okay. All right, and I apologize in advance, but I have a couple more questions about this whole issue with the transfer of information with the magistrate courts, and I'm just trying to get my head around it here. So there was a feeling at the Supreme Court that they could possibly bypass the treasurer so that money that came in for these, was it through fees to the magistrates, could be kept in the Supreme Court and not go into general revenue?
No, I don't think that's a true statement.
Okay.
It was a lack of knowledge of how payment processing should be handled in the state of West Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
So the court came up with their own way of saying, on paper, this is how we would do it. And the treasurer disagreed with that method.
Mm-hmm. The method that he disagreed with, that would have kept the money in the Supreme Court budget and not into the general revenue. Is that correct?
No, it would have had the payment processing happen on a Supreme Court server instead of the treasurer server.
Okay. So they would have had more, closer control over those payments, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you were asked by, and you stated this earlier, by Justice Ketchum to, if you could get Treasurer Perdue's signature. I'm trying to, forgive me for asking this, I know it sounds strange. Are you from Boone County, sir?
No, sir.
You're not? Okay, I thought maybe there was a connection, maybe they thought there was a connection with you and the treasurer. They figured there was some kind of relationship with you and the treasurer, that you, which that not really your job, would have a better chance of getting the signature of the treasurer?
No, that came on the tails of a meeting. Okay. Myself, Director Johnson, scheduled a meeting with Treasurer Perdue and I believe his lead IT person or payment processing person.
Mm-hmm.
And the discussion came after that meeting. So it was after Treasurer Perdue said, no, that's not the way it's done.
Okay. After his refusal, it was, so was Director Johnson, was he involved with the conversation of those you perceived as a threat? That, you know, you either get, if you can't get us to get Perdue to sign off on this, then it could cost you your job. You said Justice Ketchum was involved with that, but was, and this is after Canterbury had been fired, so Johnson was the court administrator, correct? Was he involved with that conversation?
He was not present.
It was just you and Justice Ketchum that were there?
And it was a phone call.
Okay. And I take it that the Treasurer Perdue never changed his, you were unable to get him to change his mind?
After the document was reworked, mm-hmm. and it said the treasurer would process the payments, then it was signed off on by the treasurer.
Okay. Well, I have to ask this, and I apologize, but if Justice Ketchum threatened to have you fired if this didn't happen the way that I guess the court wanted it to, were you fired?
No, I was not fired. I resigned.
Okay. Was it your choice to resign?
It was negotiated.
It was a negotiated resignation? Okay. And this is just, I know that you weren't, I know that when they fired the administrator, it's a general practice that 3 out of the 5 justices would have to sign off on something like that. Is that the case? I know you said you weren't fired, but if someone were to say that you would be, they would have to get 2 other justices to go along with it. Is that correct?
That, to my knowledge, that's correct.
Okay, I believe that's all my questions. Thank you very much. Thanks again for being here, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Doug Holland.
Thank you. Just a question. When was your last day of employment?
November. Can't see. Sorry. PM, November 15th, 2017.
Okay, November 2017. Yesterday, and you're probably not aware of this, I'm assuming, we have a post-audit, and there were some questions about missing calendar. If you've heard about that?
No, sir.
Okay, let me just read something from this post-audit, and in a memo dated February 16, 2018, the executive assistant informed the current administrative director that in response to a request outside of this audit, she was asked to provide the daily calendars from 2005 to present, which we're speaking about Mr. Canterbury's calendar, personal calendar maintained by the court. It says, however, the calendars from 2013 to 2016, which you were employed at that time, were previously in her files were now missing. Could you explain how that could have happened? I mean, I know you know, this was asked after your employment, but how would something like that occur?
Are we talking about paper calendars or electronic calendars?
I'm assuming it'd be electronic. It was in her files, so we're assuming it electronic. I mean, is that normally, since you were the manager, would that make sense that most people's calendars maintained by the court were electronic?
No, mostly, like my personal calendar at the court was my email Outlook calendar.
Now, would the executive assistant, did she keep that calendar for you, or did you know if she kept other person's calendars?
No.
So
that's why I'm speculating that maybe you're talking about a paper calendar.
Okay.
Because if it was an email calendar, it wouldn't be missing. There's backups of the email.
Okay. That's my question. If because we weren't informed if it was an electronic or paper, so that's why I was asking if it was a common practice to keep calendars on the computer, and why would they be missing? So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Delegate Byrd. Questions?
One question, Mr. Chairman. Thank you again for continuing to persevere through this. Who supplies the printer, ink, and paper for the justices at their home if they have a printer?
If it is a court-owned printer, it is supplied by the court.
And does that paper include, I don't know what the technical term is, but to print photographs off on?
That I do not know.
Okay, and how would a justice go about requesting additional ink cartridges and paper, and/or having someone come out and install a new ink cartridge?
It would go through the help desk, IT.
And could you explain that process? Would the justice call in, or is there a form they have to fill out?
It's not written in stone. They would either contact the help desk and say, I'm out of ink, or they would call one of the IT employees and say, I'm out of ink, or they could go to possibly their secretary and say, I'm out of ink. There's a multitude of ways that they could secure ink. And/or paper.
I'm sorry?
And/or paper.
Okay. And my last question is kind of what we talked about earlier together was about the printer log. Does the printer log differentiate between what kind of item is printed out on the printer, whether it be a photograph, black and white, or color?
I mean, it's only speculation, but depending upon what type of printer and the capabilities of that printer, I'm sure there are printers on the market that can tell you what kind of paper was used, how many documents were printed, but to testify to any of the printers possessed by any justices or any other member of the court, they vary so much I can't say, yes, this is a definitive answer.
And the way we would do that would be to look at what I think was mentioned earlier by Delegate Capito is the asset number on each of the printers if there's a log regarding that.
Right. Look at the model number and see if that model number has the capabilities of logging items that were printed.
All right. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
Before I move on, just one caution. When you commit to a number of questions, I count. And I will say that Delegate Fast is a +1, but you're now in the whole 4. Okay? So the only thing I really like to hear is this is my last question. Okay? Delegate Lovejoy. Questions? Going to the back row. Delegate Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have 15 questions.
I'm counting.
Mr. Harvey, you mentioned the occurrence where you felt, and these are my words, but threatened about your employment with the treasurer situation. You also suggested there was a feeling when Justice Lawfrey suggested that you not hook up the private computers at his home, that it could jeopardize your employment. And what I want to ask you is, during the time Justice Lawfrey was the Chief Justice, was that part of the environment? What do you think, do you and fellow employees, did you feel that was part of the environment that your employment was jeopardized by possibly immoral things or other opportunities that you don't feel are right, but you felt your employment may have been jeopardized if you did not complete them because they are your direct supervisors?
I can't answer for the other employees, but my personal feelings was everything was in limbo. You didn't know what was going to happen.
So it was a common occurrence that you felt as your direct supervisor, if you didn't follow their direct orders, it could end your employment with the court.
Can you rephrase?
I tell you that the direction I'm going is we have accusations throughout this, as these things came public, that other people other than the justices were the culprits in spending money and hooking up computers possibly and things like that. And I feel that it may have been the environment there that employment may have been threatened on numerous occasions. So as we go through the process, I'd like to ask former or current court employees if that was part of the environment while Justice Lawfrey was the Chief Justice, if it was a common occurrence. So if I could get yours, and I'll continue as other court employees come through.
Right, it was not just my personal feeling. It was not a common occurrence, but personally, I had a feeling of just being in limbo. You didn't know from day to day if you were going to be employed.
Did you feel comfortable? Did you feel comfortable denying? Would you have felt comfortable if you decided necessary on not hooking up the private computers at the house? Would you have felt comfortable telling Justice Lawfrey no?
There's only one right answer to that, and it's you do the job you're asked to do by your supervisors.
Okay. I'll take that. Thank you.
Okay.
You've got a big surplus. All right. Delegate Canistro, any questions? Delegate Eisner? Delegate Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In regard to the follow-up a little bit, the gentleman from 36th, from the threats that you'd received, was it apparent to you that it was coming from an individual where you were threatened with your employment? Did it come from administration of the court, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court? Do you have a feel of the direction of where that was coming from when it was made to you in your employment?
No direction of where it was coming from, because it was just one individual. So,
did that individual make any kind of reference to the Chief Justice wants this to happen, or so-and-so wants this to happen, and you need to make it happen or you're going to be fired?
No, it was basically stated to me, if you don't get John Perdue to sign off on this document, I am going to fire you.
Just short and sweet. Just short and sweet. Okay. Were you asked or directed to do any other work that, now that you look back on it, could be characterized as unethical or illegal in light of things that have developed recently?
No, I was asked to do something and refused to do it, and I kind of felt it was unethical.
That you refused to do?
I did.
Can you elaborate on that?
I was asked to use some grant-purchased equipment that was purchased through a federal grant for other than intended purposes, and I refused to do that.
Was that for court purposes or personal purposes?
It was for court purposes.
Let's see if he has the...
And it was purchased under federal grant money for, what type of grant was it purchased under?
It was a federal grant, and I don't recall the project number or name, but it was to set up video communication at various locations for people to go into, the public to go in and use. But it was a court-related function.
What were they asking you to use those granted resources and do that you felt was improper?
To use that purchased video equipment to, for lack of a better word, replace broken equipment either in the magistrate courts or circuit courts or family courts.
The replacement of those broken equipment, is that something that the cost would be borne by budgetary line items within the Supreme Court as a regular basis? Would it be paid for to replace those broken items by the court out of the regular budget, I guess is what I'm asking?
In a perfect world, would the court include that as a budget item? Yes.
So they were trying to circumvent their regular budgetary process and use grant money or granted equipment?
No, I do not think that was the purpose. The purpose was we had a video unit down or multiple video units down, and instead of waiting to order those that may take several days to come in, it's no, you take these that are already purchased and move them into that location.
Is it safe to say that state resources were used to permanently install a network in the Lawfrey home?
It is a permanent network, but it can be removed. And yes, state resources were used to install that.
What type of state resources?
The network cabling, the Cat5 wire was purchased by the court. The computers were purchased by the court. All items needed were purchased by the court, with the exception of the internet. I think the internet was already connected and purchased by Justice Lawfrey.
Did you have to perform those functions for any other justice as far as installation of a network into their residences?
I did not.
Is it safe to say that because of the work of the court employees and the state resources put in, that it added a value or an enhancement to the Lawfrey home?
Personal opinion, yes, it may have increased the value, but I'm not a realtor.
And my final question, Mr. Chairman. I assume that there are occasions where you can have interaction with other directors or IT personnel that work for the state of West Virginia, just whether formally or informally. Are you aware if any other elected state officials have state-supported home offices that they work from?
No, it never came up in discussion with other IT individuals or contract.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And to our members, just for your information, we will break for lunch, but I want to give Mr. Harvey some relief. So I'd like to get it finished with this, our questioning, before we break for lunch, so he won't have to wait around. And I'd also ask, just please don't ask questions that have been asked numerous times already. So if you've got new questions, let's ask them, but if not, let's move on. Next up would be Delegate Overington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an undisclosed number of questions. Was there a chain of command at the Supreme Court when you were assigned different work responsibilities? Did there appear to be a chain of command?
Was there an organizational chart? Yes. Was it so strict that I would have to check with my supervisor before walking down the hall? No.
Could any of the 5 Supreme Court justices give you assignments on their own, or did it have to go through some type of channel or structure? Would Steve Canterbury, would they be handled through him, or just you would be dealing with all 5 and they would make individual requests, or how would that work?
It worked both ways. Sometimes the justices or justice would request through the administrative director and then on to me or other directors of the court. And sometimes there was direct communication from a justice to me or a director of the court.
And for the lower courts, for the circuit courts, would that be processed through Steve Canterbury, or could a local circuit judge make a request directly to you?
Yes.
And the same thing with
magistrate courts, family courts.
So they could contact you directly about a request or some concern they had.
And just a rule of thumb, it wasn't a written policy. I would discuss with the administrative director, person X called me, this is what they want. You know, do we go through a formal approval process, or is this a verbal approval process?
Was there a priority established on if you had different assignments being requested at the same time?
A priority established, no written policy on priorities, but if you were asked to do something by a circuit judge, then yes, that circuit judge comes before a magistrate.
And so for the 5 justices, they would be sort of at the top of the priority list?
Correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Foster.
Yes, my question's in reference to, you talked about the gentleman from the 23rd, talked about the removal of equipment from justices' homes. Obviously, during your tenure, there were justices that were either resigned or were not elected. Is it common practice to go remove any Cat5 cable from their homes or any items that, for one, that don't have that asset tag?
It is.
So you all normally go remove those from the home whenever the justice either resigns or is not elected again?
Normally it's just verbal at first. You know, please return all equipment that belongs to the court. And if for some reason there is something at a former employee's house, then it will be picked up by either court security or IT.
Okay, and one other question specifically with Justice Workman. Your tenure was from 2005 to 2017, is that correct?
Correct.
And then she was reelected in 2008. At that time, was there work that had to be done are you aware of any work that had to be done towards installation at her residence?
Right, I'm not aware of any.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Delegate Simonia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned to the delegate from Boone that you felt like you were leaned on hard by a justice for a federal grant that was being used in a different manner than what it was intended. Can you elaborate on that? Like, who leaned on you hard on that?
Correct. It was not a justice.
Was it the court administrator?
Correct.
Steve Canterbury?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Has there been any other instances where you felt threatened by any justice for any other situation that you felt like you were threatened with your job, other than Justice Ketchum?
I mean, there's only been a couple instances of blunt, and I've already talked about those.
Okay. Thank you.
Delegate Fast.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. State money would have been used to install computer equipment in all the justices' homes, not just Justice Lawfrey. Is that correct? That had computer equipment installed?
That is correct as far as equipment, yes. If it was state-owned, then yes, it would cost the state money to install that equipment.
Okay. The lady just asked you about who leaned on you regarding use of grant money, and you refused to do that because you thought that that was not the purpose of the grant. And you said it was not Steve Canterbury. Was it Mr. Johnson?
It was not grant money, it was equipment. So it was equipment purchased through a grant. And yes, it was Administrator Johnson.
Okay. And when was this about? If you can give me a year.
I can't give you an exact year without documentation, but it would be between his hiring and my leaving.
Okay. Was this a big deal? Did it cause a rift?
It felt like it did. But again, that's just a personal opinion, and my feelings, can be construed a million different ways.
Okay. Now, I just want to clarify, you did not say that Justice Lawfrey's suggestion that this second computer not be hooked up to the Supreme Court network was a threat to your job, did you?
I didn't feel it was a threat to my job.
You just had an internal, personal check on your belief only.
That is correct.
Okay.
Personal belief only.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Capito, questions? Delegate Wayne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did we just hear about the specific event that happened in November when you said enough is enough and you turned your resignation in?
Specific event?
My question is, was there a specific event that happened and that you said enough is enough?
No, it led up to that event.
Sure. Okay, that's the only question I had. Thanks.
Delegate Hanshaw. Delegate Flashhour.
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
I have no questions. Council, any follow-up before I ask Mr. Allen and Mr. Carr? Any questions, Mr. Carr? And I don't see Mr. Allen, so I assume he has no questions. Then is there any reason that we cannot excuse Mr. Harvey? Mr. Harvey, we thank you for your appearance and for your candor and endurance as well. Thank you. Hope you have a good day.
Thank you, sir.
To members of the committee, we will be in recess until 1:15. Let me just give you a quick overview of what we're going to do. We have a Mr. Fletcher Atkins that will be testifying after lunch. We have the recording from the Finance Committee that's referred to in some of the documents of Justice Lawfrey's testimony. We're also going to play a video of some interviews in hopes of setting up some evidence that we hopefully will be able to get out of the JIC information that we're going through as you speak. So hopefully that'll pretty well take us through the end of today. We will not meet tomorrow. I know that breaks everybody's heart, but that's the effect of moving late last night and also the retirement of Justice Ketchum. So we're in recess until 1:15.